You're tuned in to the Reality Fred podcast. Food and travel, cool stuff, weird stuff, entertainment, and more. You made the choice to be here, and my friend, you've chosen wisely. Now buckle up, because it's time to get started. It's time for the Reality Fred podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another podcast episode of the Reality Fred podcast. I'm your host, once again, Fred Finley. Today, we're going to be doing another podcast in my food and travel segment, and this one is about another one of my favorite places here in the United States to visit, and that is Charleston, South Carolina. I first visited Charleston many years ago when I set out to do just kind of a fun getaway trip to do some photography. I love traveling around and doing photography, of course, and boy, Charleston was no letdown. What was interesting is at that time I was teaching a photography class at a local college, and I actually had these series of DVDs that I was showing to the class, and what was really neat is one of the DVDs ended up being an entire DVD about doing landscape photography right in Charleston, and that was actually, I ended up showing that to the class without even realizing it, that it was all about Charleston the same day that I left for my first trip. So actually I played the DVD that night in the class, and then I actually hopped in my car and drove the trip down south to Charleston that night. Anyways, had a fantastic trip down, and really just fell in love with the place. The thing I took away from Charleston that first visit is just, which it's so neat about it, you go down there and you have three distinct kind of scenes to visit and enjoy. You have the downtown scene, which is so awesome, so full of history and old architecture, but yet so full of life. It's a very young, vibrant scene, but yet it's a very old historical downtown area, but with just so much culture and history in it. You also have the beaches down there in Charleston, so you have fantastic beaches to go to, and then of course you have the beautiful plantations and gardens. So you kind of have three really neat things to do down there, in addition to all the wonderful places to eat and visit and everything like that. So for this episode, since it's actually been a few years since I've been down there, I can't wait to get back, but it's been a few years. I wanted to make sure that the show stayed specific. So I reached out to one of my friends that actually lives down in Charleston, and this podcast is actually going to be a back and forth interview with her, with some of her best advice on places to eat, things to do, places to stay, and really her top choices of, if you're going to go to Charleston, the things that you probably should definitely want to do, so that even if you just go there for a short trip, that by the time you leave, if you knock out a few of these things, then you can really leave knowing that you got at least a really good Charleston, South Carolina experience. So without further ado, let's hop into that interview. All right, so I'm with my friend Molly. And Molly, just to get things started here and kick this off, before we get into the places to go, the things to do, and places to eat and things like that, I would like you to just tell the listeners about your experience in Charleston. How long have you lived there? When did you move down? And what life in Charleston has been like for you?
Sure, absolutely. So, first of all, thank you for having me on. This is very exciting. I'm excited to talk about my city, and I hope that I give the listeners some really good information. So I have been in Charleston for almost 10 years now. I kind of just, it was almost kind of just a chance thing that I kind of ended up here, but it's really funny because all throughout high school and growing up in Pittsburgh, whenever I would write or whenever I would think about, places that I wanted to go, Charleston was always the first on my list, even though I had never set foot in the city.
Okay.
So the fact that I actually ended up living here is pretty cool. And I think that that's, there was probably some divine intervention or something happening behind the scenes that I was unaware of. But I've been here for 10 years. I absolutely love it. I love the people. I love the climate. It's a wonderful city, and you've been here, so I think that you enjoyed it as well. And I think that anyone that comes to visit, they can also see just how charming it is.
Yeah,
And
yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
And
so
I think that growing up similarly, I mean, I always had like you said, it's charming in being from the north. Having never been in the South as a kid, but you always hear the stories about the South, how nice everybody is down South, and it just sounds like this magical place that you want to go and visit and things like that. And there's something definite about Charleston that you get down there and you experience, and it like all those fantasies you have about going down south, everything kind of comes to life in Charleston. So when you moved down there, did you realize, I mean, that it was going to be a permanent thing at the time? Did you realize that 10 years later that you'd still be down there, or when you moved down there 10 years ago, was that a big unknown for you?
I think that, because whenever I first moved south and I graduated from Penn State and I kind of packed my car the next day and I just headed south. And initially I ended up a little bit further north in South Carolina. So I was kind of in the Myrtle Beach area. I stayed there for a couple years and then I spent some time in Raleigh, and I wasn't in Raleigh for even, I think, maybe 3 months before the opportunity to move to Charleston kind of was presented to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, it was almost just kind of like divine intervention that I was supposed to be here. And I think that once I was finally here and once I was settled, I don't think that there was really any thought of leaving anytime soon.
Okay.
So
All right.
it's that good.
All right. So, well, let's just go ahead and jump into it. Let's start telling people, we've generalized how awesome it is down there in Charleston, but let's get into some of the specifics for those people who might maybe have never been down there, and, maybe we can convince to take a vacation to get down there. So what I want to do, we're going to talk about everything, all the must do things. We'll talk about, where to go, where to stay, what to do, and where to eat. But what I usually like to do with these traveling podcasts is basically right off the bat talk about the main Charleston experience. So kind of in the mindset that if someone was coming down and was only going to be there for, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days top, something like that, let's just go over some of the must see, must do things that you're like, no matter what you do down here or how long, these are the things that you need to do or see so that when you leave, you know that you've got those major Charleston experiences in that trip. So is there anything that jumps out to you along those lines?
Yes, the very first thing that kind of jumped out to me whenever you and I talked about this initially is visiting a plantation.
Mm-hmm.
And we have quite a few of them to choose from here, but I think that for someone to have like the ultimate Charleston experience, this is something that you absolutely must do. I think that the different plantations that we do have, they each kind of offer something different. They're all, oddly enough, all along the same road. They're all along the same location, along the Ashley River. So they're really easy to get to. They're a little ways from downtown, but I think that visiting one or two of those is just absolutely, I mean, you have to do it.
Well, let me ask this, and with the plantations, I know from my trips down there, I've been to Magnolia Gardens in Middleton Place, which I'll come back to in a second. And now with both of those, they were, I believe they were both like both had sprawling gardens, enormous gardens that you could walk through. Are all the plantations like that, or is that unique to those two places? And are some of the other plantations completely different, or are they all that have that garden theme?
So that is really unique to both Magnolia and Middleton.
Okay.
There are some other plantations, and one that I kind of made a note of here is Drayton Hall.
Okay.
I really like Drayton Hall because the house, you can tour the house, it's completely empty, but it's exactly as they left it. There's no electricity, 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 there's no indoor plumbing. So when you walk through the house, you actually get the feel of what it would be like to live during that time. And the house is also kind of perched on the bank of the Ashley River, which is just, to me, it was amazing to kind of walk through and actually see what something would have looked like back then. I mean, it's one thing to walk through the gardens, because the gardens are beautiful and that they make changes to those every year, and sometimes there are new plans and, this and that changes. But I think that visiting Drayton Hall and kind of walking through and actually just kind of getting a glimpse into what it would have been like, how grand but how rustic at the same time it was, is something that I think is just wonderful to experience.
So if someone comes down, now here's the tough question. If someone comes down and you're saying one of the must-do things is visit a plantation, let's say a visitor only has time to visit one of these plantations, which one would you recommend that if they only get to go to one, that they should go to as part of this, again, leaving and saying I had a good starter experience for visiting Charleston?
Okay. I'm probably a little bit biased on this one because I was married here, but I am always going to say Middleton.
Okay.
Because you do get the elements of the house and the barns, and they have animals on the property that, like they would have had 100, 200 years ago. And I think that it's just really kind of, you get that feel from it. It's not overly extravagant. I think that Magnolia is beautiful, but I think that it's a little over the top for me, at least. And I feel that you get a little bit more of an authentic experience at Middleton, just because, you have the amazing garden, you have the house, and actually a portion, I can't remember if it's a portion of the house or the entire main house was actually destroyed.
Okay, so yeah, because I've been to Magnolia, Middleton, and I kind of get my memories mixed up a little on which is which. And I was going to ask you which one was the one that had the house that I don't know whether it was burned down or destroyed. So that was the Middleton one.
That was Middleton, and that's kind of and I think that I mean, because you and I went there together, it's kind of where there's just a pile of bricks. It's almost like a little pile of rubble, and it overlooks just a portion of the gardens and the Ashley River, and it's just beautiful.
And I think over by that pile of bricks, I remember there was like this little, real old, like the staircase that I think probably led up to the front door. And it's such, especially for I mean, well, the one thing in general, if you're a photographer, Charleston is a definite place visit, a must visit place. And not only are the gardens beautiful, but I just remember how neat and how photogenic that spot was, where with just the remains of that house, but that staircase that leads up to where the door used to be.
Yes.
It's so neat.
I love that staircase. Is one of my favorite. I love it. And it's just something that you can't find recreated anywhere else, because that's something that, that's a part of history. And I think that that's one thing that I love so much about this city, is that everywhere you turn, you see little spots like that, that kind of just, and you can let your imagination run wild. So, which is really fun.
And Middleton is definitely famous for its having weddings done there. So I didn't know that you had your wedding there. That is awesome. That's awesome.
I did. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, so now number one, so basically visit the plantation. Anything else, and in this case we're going to say specifically Middleton. So right now we're saying if you go to Charleston, the number one must thing to do is make sure you visit Middleton Plantation. Anything else on your must-do list?
So, another thing that I think that people really, really should do if they visit Charleston is just get out, put on some good walking shoes, and explore the downtown
Absolutely.
area on foot.
Hmm.
Um, I think that, a lot of people are kind of, they see how narrow our streets are, and there's a lot of traffic, and we have, horse-drawn carriages and all sorts of stuff going on. I absolutely think the very best way to see the city is by just walking it, and it's very walkable.
Yeah, and it's definitely certainly that old. Even though it's South Carolina, one of the original 13 colonies, but it definitely still has that old world feel. Especially in the old part of downtown. I mean, it's not super tall buildings. You have a lot of old buildings, a few stories tall. It's just a beautiful older city, and yeah, it's